Welcome back. My name is Russell Cottrell, and in this series of videos we're editing a photo and photo line using curves. In this video, we're going to learn how to use curves to adjust saturation and vibrance. We're going to start with a little color science. 3 concepts we will use throughout the series are luminance, hue, and saturation. Luminance means how bright or dark a color is. Hue is what we usually mean when we ask what color something is, red, yellow, green, and so forth. Saturation refers to how intense a color is. A vivid color, such as fire engine red, may be completely saturated. Gray is completely unsaturated. Now for some more color science. Up to now, we've been using curves in the RGB color space. What does that mean? Conventional images are represented using the 3 primary colors red, green, and blue, which you can see here. In digital imaging, these are called channels. This box here with the Greek letter sigma on it means we've selected the sum of all 3 channels and have been raising or lowering all the channels together. But if we select an individual channel, we can increase or decrease the value of just that channel, like red, for example. We can give the sky more red or less red, more green, less green. If we go back to sum, we can see the curves for all of our channels. We will return to the subject of RGB curves when we talk about color balance. But now, we're going to switch color spaces. Reset. This box here selects the color space. Besides RGB, we have LAB, HIS, and HSV. You may be familiar with HSV, V for value, sometimes written with a B for brightness. They're the same thing. It's HSL that's different. Don't worry about that. Color pickers often include one of these as an option because they're very intuitive. You pick the hue, then the saturation, then the value or brightness to specify the color. Those 3 numbers are the channels of the HSV color space, and they each have a mathematical definition that's actually based on RGB. The LAB color space is a world of its own, and we'll be talking about it later. For now, we'll focus on HIS. HIS, or HSI, has something of a formal definition if you look it up. Photoline's HIS color space is actually a little different. The technical explanation, feel free to ignore this, is that the S of Photoline's HIS color space is actually what is usually called chroma, and I think it's the most useful because chroma maxes out at the middle of the luminance range, in the range of the primary colors that look most saturated to the eye. In HSV, colors that are very light or very dark, almost white or black, can still have maximum saturation. Bottom line, I find HIS to be the most useful when adjusting saturation. So, HIS it is. Here are the 3 gradients for hue, intensity, and saturation. Let's select the saturation channel. Now, when we move the curve, we're adjusting not luminance, but saturation. If we flatten the curve all the way to the bottom, we have removed all the color from the image and are left with black and white and gray. If we raise the curve all the way to the top, we get this psychedelic image. We probably want something in between. If you look at the colors in this image, you probably find them sort of dull without much overall saturation. Now's a good time to look at the histogram. A histogram is a graph showing the distribution of pixels in the image according to some parameter, in this case saturation. You can see that most of the pixels in this image are down at the low end of saturation. If we increase the slope of the entire curve, like a conventional saturation control, we can brighten up those colors, but note that at some point, the colors that are already most saturated start to look extremely saturated before the less saturated colors, such as the foliage, have a chance to catch up. If we keep going, now the foliage looks right, but the globe and the railing are overdone. If we raise the low end of the curve to preferentially saturate the least saturated colors, we get lots of little color artifacts, especially since this is a JPEG and already has compression artifacts. So let's take a point near but not at the bottom and raise it. Now we're increasing the saturation everywhere in a more pleasing way. Let's start over and select the areas we want to saturate. The blue of the globe is already pretty saturated. It doesn't need any more. So let's click the North Pole to fix a point on the curve. Now let's take hold of the foliage, which needs work. You can see on the graph that the saturation is down in the main mass of the histogram. Let's click it and raise it. We're now increasing the saturation of all the less saturated areas while keeping the most saturated areas fixed. The saturation of less saturated colors like this is called vibrance. Many photo editors, such as Photoline, have both vibrance and saturation controls, but if you use curves, you can increase or decrease whatever part of the saturation channel you want. The exact adjustment will depend on the image and what you're trying to accomplish. An image with lots of vibrance, where all the colors are highly and equally saturated, can start to look like a painting or even a cartoon. Lowering the vibrance can make a brightly colored subject pop out from its surroundings. It's all up to you. And as before, we can mask our saturation curve. The bear, for example, probably doesn't need green fur, so we can mask him out. And maybe partially reduce the saturation of the subject. Now that we have several layers in our image, we should know how to use layer groups. If we select several layers by holding down the Shift or Control key while clicking them, we can then right-click and group marked layers. We now have a layer group that we can expand by clicking this arrowhead. Note that groups and layers may be renamed for ease in identifying them. My group. Sky. This comes in handy when your image ends up with dozens of adjustment layers. And now that we have a layer group, we can turn the entire group off and on. If you've previously used a saturation control, it may have included hue ranges so that the saturation of different colors may be adjusted independently. In Photoline, we can do that with curves as well by using color filters. Other applications may call them blend ranges. But once again, Photoline can do what others cannot, apply filters to adjustments based on hue or saturation, as well as luminance or RGB channels. And we'll talk about that in our next video, color filters, blend modes, and color balance.